couple more minutes, or we're good to go. I'd say I can hand it to Chapin to kick it off.
Great. Thank you, Olivia. Really appreciate everybody being here. My name's Chapin Spencer. I'm Director of Public Works, and very much appreciate the folks in the room and those online for taking time on this quintessentially beautiful late summer evening here to talk about the Railyard Enterprise Project. And we're entering in a pretty exciting phase of the project, and tonight we'll be going over the various alignments that we have been working on and our consulting team has been working on, and we are seeking to get your input so that we can, in the coming month or two, select a preferred alternative or proposed preferred alternative at the City Council in September or October. And we're really looking forward to your input tonight. And with no further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Senior Public Works Engineer Corey Mims.
Appreciate it. I'm Corey Mims, project manager for the City of Burlington on this project. I've, as Chapin said, just kind of helping to facilitate this next phase of this project that has been going on for a number of years. We are going to start off with just a couple little technical things for those of you who are online. So since we were using Zoom, and this is a webinar feature, we just want to make people aware that there are some icons along the bottom of your screen, if your screen is full sized, in which you can interact with. For this particular webinar, the chat function is not enabled. You can't put anything on there. We are asking that if you have any questions throughout this presentation, there's the Q&A function in order to submit those questions. We will plan to address all questions and comments at the end of the presentation. And we would be going both through those who are here in person, as well as those who online have either raised their hand or put forward a question through the Q&A. We don't anticipate stopping during the presentation to address raised hands online. We just ask that you hold those comments, questions till the end, and then we're happy to address any of those as we go through the presentation. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Corey, just one thing to add to that slide.
Yep.
If we could have participants rename themselves on Zoom, if you're able. If you can't figure it out, don't worry about it. But when we do get around to questions, it would be great if we had some full names on there that we can use to address participants. So if you can figure that out, great. If not, no worries.
Yeah, so as part of this process, we'd like to take any public comments and have names associated with those comments for our records.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
So on this, we are looking to go through this presentation. It's going to talk about the introductions to the project, where we've been, talk about the project background, the history, the timeline that this project has been underway previously, as well as what we're looking to in the future with it, the purpose and need of this project as it has been presented, the project area that we are looking to identify, the alternatives that are being reviewed, as well as we'll get into further conversation on those. The preferred alternative that is currently being identified based upon the data collected, as well as the next steps that this project would take following public feedback and along the NEPA process, which is what we are currently underway with. And we'll get into that a little bit more. At the end, we'll follow up with questions and comments from anybody, as that's why we're here. So. Just a quick introduction, the project team. Obviously, Chapin Spencer, the Director of Public Works, has just spoken. Myself, I'm Corey Mims, Senior Public Works Engineer with the City of Burlington. I'm a project manager on this. I'm sitting here with me is Norm Baldwin, the City Engineer for the City of Burlington. Online, assisting me in this project is Public Works Engineer Olivia DeReese. Our consultant for this project is Stantec. They are also being assisted through CHA and RSG. With Stantec, I have with me Greg Goyette, as well as Israel. Sorry, Maynard. I would make sure I say that right. Sorry. So we are the project team that's working to evaluate these alternatives and that have previously been brought forward, and looking to proceed with this project to evaluate it further in this NEPA process.
And I just wanted to mention that the project. Project partners are also V-Trans and the Federal Highway Administration, who are helping on the project as well.
And you have self-consulted teams for the CHA and RSG.
Yeah.
They're online leave, right?
Yeah, we have Dale Godlikowski and Jonathan Slason. Dale from CHA and Jonathan from RSG. CHA's helped with the rail design piece of it, and CHA's helped with the traffic analysis piece. So I'll just go through some project background for everybody in attendance to get people caught up. This project has been underway for some time now, and you may or may not have been engaged with it in the past, so it'd be helpful to have this history as we go through the presentation. So what is the Railyard Enterprise Project? The idea behind the Railyard Enterprise Project is a proposed new roadway connecting Pine Street to Battery Street. It's a little bit more than that. One of the goals of the project is to make a multimodal transportation connection between the two streets. And there have been two studies that have been done up to this point to help get through this process. One was called the scoping, planning and environmental linkages study that was completed in 2016. And then a supplemental scoping study was completed in 2020. And I'll get more into what those two studies accomplished here in the next slide. So the timeline for the project, this project was actually initiated as the Railyard Enterprise Project back in 2012. That first study was completed in 2016. It was initiated in 2013. And then the supplemental scoping study was completed from 2017 to 2020. And what those two studies did, they established a purpose need for the project. They identified several possible alternatives for making that new transportation connection between Battery and Pine Street, and analyzed a bunch of those alternatives. And at the end of that process of those two studies, the city's council resolved to support the advancement of three of those alternatives into further evaluation, and actually directed the Department of Public Works to pursue federal and state funding for the project. So fast forward to 2021, and the city has secured that funding to advance this project. And that brings us to today. So in 2022, the city, in collaboration with V-Trans at HWA, the consultant team, began evaluating those three alternatives that City Council directed them to evaluate. Those were alternatives 1B, 2, and 5B, and you'll understand the significance of that as we get further into the presentation. But those were three different alternatives to make that transportation connection. So that's led to tonight's discussion. There's been a lot of work done to evaluate those three alternatives. We've met several times with property owners, project stakeholders. We've met several times as a team to talk through some of the issues. And we've refined those alternatives and have come to a point where we're going to present what those three alternatives are, and then what the anticipated preferred alternative is going to be. So I'll turn it now over to Corey and discuss how this project also fits into broader city initiatives, especially in the south end of Burlington, because that's an important piece of this puzzle as well.
So previously, in coordination with the other projects that have been going on in the south end of the community, such as Champlain Parkway project, the Shelter Street roundabout, and V-Trans Class 1 paving, there's a lot of infrastructure work that has been happening in the south end, and as a city, we're trying to manage the amount of impacts at any one point in time that the community has been encountering. So through that, the South End Construction Coordination Plan was developed. This was a plan that looked at what projects are upcoming, how we can stagger those to the best of our ability to make sure we still maintain traffic flow through the South End communities, as well as minimizing the significant impacts to individual businesses and locations at any point in time. So that being said, a part of this Southland Construction Coordination Plan had been the development. A large part of it was the phasing of the Champlain Parkway project, which many of you are aware of. So as you can see in this has been previously presented to council, to DPW commission, to this document has been around for a good little while now. And what we're looking at is, at this point in time, as I kind of just go through this, right now, V-Trans Class 1 paving is underway. They've completed a portion of it, but they're still going to be working from 22 into 23 to complete that. That's Class 1 highways. Vermont Rail and Amtrak have completed the Amtrak project, which is now underway and operational here in Burlington. That was also another South End work that was being coordinated. You have the Shelburne Street Roundabout project, which is currently under construction, anticipated to be a functioning roundabout at the end of the season, the winter, with the completion of the project next season in 2023. Then we get down to the next is the initial construction contract, which is currently underway for the Champlain Parkway project, which is the Champlain Parkway project from Home Avenue up to Lakeside Avenue. The Lakeside Avenue portion of redevelopment of Lakeside from the Champlain Parkway to Pine Street, and the redevelopment of Pine Street from Lakeside Avenue up to Kilburn. So that is the initial construction contract that is underway currently. That has a completion date of 2024, October of 2024 to be completed. We have underway the Main Street Great Streets project at Main Street. That is in the design phase. That is looking to try to enter the construction in 2023. We have this project, the Railyard Enterprise project, which we're working on, which is currently in the NEPA phase. We are sitting here talking to you all as part of this process of evaluating these alternatives that we can then submit in order to have a preferred alternative that we then could go further into design phase. So that right now is underway. We're working at our best of our abilities to make sure that everything is being done appropriately and the proper input is received and the selection is made. That would then proceed into design and ultimately looking for construction sometime in the 2025 timeframe. Then you would have also at that time in approximately 2025, you'd be looking at the final construction contract for the Champlain Parkway project, which would consist of the 189 connection up from 189 to Home Avenue and the Pine Street from Kilburn to Maine. And that would look to sometime in the 2025 to 2027 timeframe for construction. The project area for the for the Railyard Enterprise project is what is identified here. And so you can kind of see that this is going from the southern edge, the Barge Canal down there at about Marble Street. The northern limits of it is approximately the King Street or the Main Street area as you're on the waterfront side, and the eastern edge is predominantly Pine Street. And this is the area in which the Railyard Enterprise is looking to be implemented and provide additional positive improvements to the infrastructure in that area. So in this, we have the project's purpose and need. So through the Pell study, it was identified that additional infrastructure improvements could be done, and really the purpose and the need of this was pretty much listed down to 4 points. So on this, we have this multimodal transportation infrastructure is really to support the economic development in the area. It'd be to improve the livability of the surrounding neighborhoods. It would be to enhance the multimodal travel connectivity between the Pine Street corridor and Battery Street, as well as to improve the intermodal connections from that same corridor, the Burlington Railyard and the VH and the National Highway System. So, because that's it in that area. So, this is what the project is looking to complete. We have alternatives that were through the initial Pell and the supplemental Pell narrowed down to 3 alternatives for the roadway alignment. These 3 are being evaluated on a number of categories. In that, it is also being compared against a no-build option. So we are comparing 4 options, 4 alternatives for this roadway in this process currently. You have the 1B, which is the more direct connection of Battery Street to Pine Street with a South Champlain connection. You have the alternative 2, which is more of a grid street network, which has a very similar Battery Street to Pine Street connection, which would make a grid street with Kilburn near where the current Curtis Lumber is. And then it would have 2 additional connections to Pine Street further south in front of the 339 Pine Street property, as well as closer to at Marble in order to continue that grid street creation with the alternative 2. Alternative 5B is another connection similarly, although it does not have the grid street portion at the top. It's 2 connections between Kilburn and Pine Place and another down at Marble. So these are the 3 alternatives that are being evaluated and compared with a no build option as part of this NEPA process.
Yeah, so like Corey said, those 3 alternatives were evaluated for several criteria in accordance with the federal process, including impacts to traffic, impacts to noise, air quality, environmental resources, including floodplains. We had to consider what the soils are underneath these properties. Many of these properties have contaminated soils. A couple of those alternatives come very close, in close proximity to the Barge Canal Superfund site. Taking all those factors into account is leading us towards the selection of alternative 1B as the preferred concept, with the primary factors being the amount of additional infrastructure that would be built with 2 and 5B has marginal benefit compared to what the impacts would be, especially in relation to the contaminated soils in the area, as well as the potential issues that can excavating near the Barge Canal Superfund site would pose. So that's leading us down the road towards 1B as being the preferred alternative. And what I'm going to do now is walk you all through alternative 1B, and then we'll talk through the next steps for the project, and then open it up to Q&A. So I'll try to be brief going through this so we can get to your questions and comments. So
one thing to say is, in part of the NEPA process is the selection alternative is the phase that we are in currently. What this would mean is we would look at these 4 ultimately options, come up with, based upon the gathered information, preferred alternative that would then be submitted to the NEPA process for federal highway approval. Once we get that approval, then the next stage would be looking at the detailed design of the selected alternative to look at where exactly is that road going to be aligned, what widths exactly are the curb to curb going to be, is the shared use path going to be, and those further details would be then determined in the next phase. In this phase, we're just looking at which of the connection types are we generally looking at, and those further details of intersection connectivity and specific dimensioning won't be determined until later on in the process, just to be clear.
Yeah, and with that said, we have engaged with several project stakeholders in an attempt to refine this alignment, the typical section for the roadway, the location of a shared use path, to attempt to minimize the impacts. There are still going to be impacts, and we'll talk through those. And those are things that we need to continue to engage the stakeholders on as we advance this project. So
Greg, could you expand for the group the Barge Canal and the Superfund site and the consequence of that and the kind of limits of that relative to these other alternatives that were, as staff, or just believe should be dismissed?
yeah.
So some people may not know what about the Superfund site, the details of that, the institutional controls that go with some of these parcels.
Yeah, so here's alternative 1B, and you can see its proximity to the Barge Canal site. Alternative 2, again, you can see how this new roadway infrastructure would get extremely close to the Barge Canal Superfund site, as well as alternative 5B. So, regarding the concerns with building new roadway infrastructure there are the institutional controls on the parcels adjacent to the barge canal, as well as concerns with the barge canal itself, and construction of the new roadway. What cannot occur is that it cannot, how do you say,
Mobilize.
yeah, it cannot mobilize a contamination underground through there and cause it to spread further. And it can't compromise the ability to further mitigate that site in the future. So that's one of the bigger concerns with alternative 2 and 5B, which is leading us towards alternative 1.
Thank you.
So with alternative 1B, I'm just gonna briefly walk you through the roadway alignment, starting down here at Pine Street. So this is Pine Street. Here's the Railyard. Here's Maple Street over here, South Champlain Street. Main Street's off the page, and the Barge Canal site is off the page as well. So starting at Pine Street, the new roadway connection would come through the northeast corner of the 339 Pine Street site, or we call this the former street department site, that is currently being leased by CSWD, Resource, and Burlington City Arts members. This is a city-owned parcel. And then the new roadway would come through the Curtis Lumber site, and right now through the Curtis Lumber storage shed that's on site, and then continue on to the north into the Railyard parcel that's currently owned by the state of Vermont and operated by Vermont Rail System. And then through what is called the Independent Plot property and through the southern portion of that building, and continuing on through that site and then back into the Railyard, where it enters into the current right-of-way for Battery Street, and passes to the west of what is the Rambler building and the Waterfront Dive Shop, and makes that connection to Battery Street.
Yeah. One thing to be noted, we just want to say, is that as far as we're looking at with the alternatives, the final design of the intersection connections is still being determined, and that won't be finalized until further. It's the direct connect, the more or less the alignment is what is being preferred for the alternative. The specific intersection connections at Pine Street are still being determined, as there's multiple options that are going to be reviewed as part of the design as we progress. So this shows a Y connection, which on the right hand side you'll see that this is the 1B1, identifying that as being a signalized Y intersection, and there are two other intersection connections that are also going to be reviewed further as we progress. And just to kind of for reference of those, what you are seeing on this on the top of the page in blue is a proposed realignment of Railyard facility, the horn track, which actually in its current alignment would run directly along the proposed roadway alignment. And really it's a situation that has to be relocated in order to facilitate a roadway being installed in this area. So those discussions with the Railyard, with the RS, and with the state are still underway as the project progresses. So
You also see in there some historic resources that are of interest that relate to selecting this for alternative in the route and direction of travel. So you see in the Railyard, there's a shadow of a unusual shape. Yes, that's it. That's a historic roundhouse that's a historic resource that needs to be protected. And part of the consultant's work was to obviously identify the limits of that, but also understand like vibration and impact to that resource. So there's a lot of technical work that's being done, and a lot of those details kind of drive the position of this roadway and its placement. So details that we are deeply involved with, and you may not understand, well, why did you pick that route? Well, we're trying to protect historic resource. We're trying to limit the amount of impacts to individual properties. We're trying to accommodate the operation that VRS has in Railyard. You know, all these properties that are impacted have some ongoing need that we're trying to avoid impacts to. So this is kind of our best alternative in this, best permutation of this alternative within those impacts and considerations. So it's I don't know if all this is shown on there in terms of those historic resources, but those are important for you to understand what drove these kind of position of that alignment.
Yeah, and so I'll just briefly describe kind of what the roadway section is looking like now as it's designed. And so the new roadway itself will have what are called shared lane markings, so that experienced bicyclists can share the road with motorists through this area. And in addition, it would have a 10-foot wide shared use path on the east side of the road. That's shown here on the east side for the entire length. And that shared use path would accommodate pedestrians as well as less experienced bicyclists that prefer a low stress environment. So, and then in addition, the curb to curb width is 26 feet through here, designed to minimize impacts to the properties. Again, that's the shared lane with motorists, bicyclists through there, the more experienced bicyclists. And that width is necessary through here with this alignment to accommodate truck traffic that needs to access the rail yard and the adjacent businesses that need access off of this roadway without encroaching upon the center line of the road, which is an important safety aspect of the roadway design. So, so it accommodates not only the truck traffic that needs to move through the new roadway, but also use that roadway for access to those businesses and operations. Right now, South Champlain Street would be teed into the new roadway at a stop-controlled intersection, and that design of that street would have pedestrian connections to the new shared use path, continuing so there's a constant pedestrian connection for the entire length of South Champlain Street, which right now on the west side of the roadway, the sidewalk terminates right about where the city right of way ends. Like Corey said, the team is still evaluating the 3 intersection options with Pine Street, which include what you see as the signalized Y intersection here, where Pine Street would tee into the new roadway. The other option, and these are concepts, the design details would still need to be refined depending on which intersection option is chosen. And we'd like to hear people's feedback on these intersection options tonight as well, is a roundabout option. And then the third option is what we're calling the signalized T option, where the new roadway would tee into Pine Street versus Pine Street teeing into the new roadway. As was mentioned, we've had several meetings with project stakeholders and property owners to get a better understanding of their concerns, their operations, and how this roadway would impact them, because there will be impacts with the construction of this new roadway. And you know, we tried to come up with a design, refine this design to minimize those impacts. So just talking through some of those impacts with everybody here today. Some of those impacts will consist of a partial demolition of the former street department building. There's this annex portion of it that would need to be demolished to accommodate the new road and shared use path. The lumber storage building on Curtis Lumber parcel would need to be either relocated or demolished, and a new storage building would have to be constructed on the remaining parcel. And we've had a few conversations with Curtis Lumber to talk through those concerns with them. And you know, we're collaborating with them as we move forward on this design to see how this new roadway would interact with the remainder of their site. In addition, we've spoken with the owner of this parcel here, where the close to home business is on. And we understand the concerns that they have with truck access for loading and unloading and parking, and working through those concerns with them, as well as the independent block, which is one of the more heavily impacted parcels here because of the demolition of a portion of their building, which also happens to be a historic resource. So there's there are some considerations that need to be made with that resource in terms of making sure that the building that remains is restored to a condition that meets certain historic preservation standards and guidelines. As well as the loss of that building, there needs to be some form of mitigation for that loss in terms of, and that is going to be determined in consultation with the city and V-Trans and the state historic preservation officer in terms of what that mitigation means. In addition, a portion of their site is going to be impacted with the parking, and the new roadway needs to consider what the best access point is to that parking area, how that parking is either reconfigured or somehow mitigated, and then also the circulation through the remainder of that lot for parking, and also truck delivery, unloading and loading. And then the Railyard is also a heavily impacted property here as well. As Corey mentioned, the track would have to be relocated. You see in this light blue here is where that track would be located. And there are several operations in the Railyard that are impacted as part of this new roadway that need to be also mitigated. And we're working closely with them to understand how that can be done. As we continue north, we've met with the owners of this building here, who happen to own this parcel back here, as well as the owners of these two buildings, to understand their concerns related to access, parking needs, and also the pedestrian and bicycle access in front of their property in order to keep those businesses functioning and viable, as well as the tenants that live in some of those buildings. So we need to continue to work with them as well as this project is advanced and we get more into the design details. So I think I've done enough talking on the alternatives for now, or this concept for now. So I guess just lastly, selection of a preferred concept here would allow us to continue that more detailed engineering for this project, and also engage those property owners to work through some of those impacts. So anything else to add, Corey, or North, to that?
Go ahead, Corey. I've got one. Go ahead. All right. So one important point to note is with the Railyard operation, there is stone ballast that they transport on a consistent basis. You see on the eastern edge of that Railyard stockpile that stone. They're loading that in rail cars on that spur that's got the blue highlight. And that area is impacted by that stone. And so for safety reasons, the shared use path is proposed to be located on the eastern side of this corridor. Worth noting, the parkway is proposed to have a shared use path on the western edge of Pine Street. So this is a continuation of that connection from the parkway to plan to at least to the terminus of Battery Street, and then some further conversations will happen and occur related to another study the city's doing in terms of Battery Street, a road diet concept of reducing from 3 lanes to 4 lanes to 3 to potentially accommodate low stress facility. So there's a lot of working pieces here that Greg's kind of laid out. We may not have hit every kind of nuance that goes with this, but I think this really he covered it pretty well. But that's one point I wanted to make sure that people understood and saw, and there was reasoning there.
Yeah, and what I was going to say similarly to what Norm was that, yeah, the understanding that there is not pedestrian and bicycle facilities on both sides of the road was identified as a requirement in order to minimize the right-of-way width and be able to fit something in this narrow corridor. There's going to be significant impacts to all parties in this area, as there isn't currently a right-of-way there existing. And so a part of that was in the discussions with the Railyard and with local property owners was that the facilities, as Norm had indicated, would be located on the eastern side. You know, this corridor is common through all three alternatives. And so, you know, just to understand that regardless of which one of the alternatives was being pursued, these same considerations of these local property stakeholders would have to be addressed. And so that's just a commonality between them all that we just want to make sure people do understand that. Do we have the cross section on here too?
And I actually have one more point to make, and that is, if anyone's familiar with the history of this area, they know and understand that this area periodically during storm events, floods. And so part of Stay Tech's scope of work is to try to find solutions to that stormwater problem. There is some alternatives that they're considering. One is to find an outfall that is directed through the Railyard to the south to the lake, which I think is probably not a likely alternative, but is one. And then there could be tanking and storage of some of that runoff in those green areas that are within the limits of this right of way. So there's a technical work that's being done outside of the direct alignment and conversations with the stakeholders and the public, but it needs to be addressed. We can't have a roadway that is always commonly flooding during every rain event. It just doesn't make any good sense. So this project is gonna hopefully will solve that problem. And that's been a perennial problem for people who work and live down there.
So, yeah, and so what we want to show is some of the typical cross sections. And again, these are the conceptual, the ideas that we're working with right now, and the exact dimensions outside of the roadway are still being worked on as we get further into the design. But typically you're looking at a Pine Street. This is between the new roadway section between Pine Street and South Champlain would consist of the 26-foot roadway curb to curb. You'd have a 5.5-foot buffer. And then you have a 10-foot shared use path on the eastern or northeastern side of the roadway alignment, with an additional 2-foot buffer from those adjacent properties. And then as we get further between the South Champlain and Battery Street portion of it, you're having the proposed railroad track alignment, and you have a 10-foot rail access area that is required to be adjacent to the rail tracks. There's likely going to be some sort of fencing or security fencing that would separate the roadway from the rail yard. And so an 18-foot minimum offset from the center of that track to the edge of the roadway is a requirement. And that is a large portion of why there is nothing able to be proposed for pedestrian usage west of the roadway for safety and for just logistical restrictions. That is why we do not have facilities on both sides of the road in this section. You are looking again at the same 26-foot cross section, curb to curb. Again, with at this point, with a narrowing cross section, the width of the kind of green belt between the road shoulder and the shared use path might vary here, depending upon what is available as it has to navigate around some physical structure limitations, such as the edge of the independent block building that is not being proposed to be removed, as well as Rambler building as it's making curves at the more northern portion of this roadway alignment. Again, looking to maintain a 10-foot shared use path for this whole corridor, and again, additional 2-foot buffer on the property side. So this is kind of the typical cross section that we're looking at for this roadway alignment at this time.
Ask a question. What do you anticipate the travel speed being on the shared bicycle and auto portion?
Yeah, this roadway is a standard typical Burlington road. It is a 25-mile-an-hour roadway. Through our design, we anticipate that the traffic would be maintained. The design in itself does not promote faster speeds, as you kind of have that serpentine kind of movement to it, as well as you have multiple access points between different parcels along these corridors where cars will be entering and exiting traffic. The shared use path on the side does cross a few more driveways due to the access that is likely to be necessary for those parcels. And so coordination and further design is being worked on in those locations. So for this project, the next steps, this fall, we're looking to go to council with hopefully the desire to be able to have them on board with a preferred alternative. As we said, we anticipate the preferred alternative to be the 1B, but we would go to council and present to them and get their feedback following public feedback today, as well as additional stakeholder engagements that we plan to have prior to the next available council meeting. We would look for later in November to file the EA and formally submit the preferred alternative. And then we would continue through the winter of this year to gather further utility information as well as design information to further this project design into 2023 and beyond. So with what?
Question time?
Oh, 1 second. Oh, one card. So how to stay engaged with this? Really, we have the website, railyardenterprise.com. We will continually post information there. This meeting is being recorded and will also be posted to the project website for those who may want to share this information with others. Myself, Corey Mims, I'm the project manager. You can reach out to me. My contact information is also included in this if you have further questions. And at that, I believe we appreciate your time, and we are going to move over to the questions and comments portion.
So just to share with the group here, September council meeting is when? September?
There's a meeting in September. There's meetings October.
No, but
Which
what's the specific date?
there's a meeting on the 12th. There's a meeting on the 19th, and I believe there's October, mid-October as well as
I
another.
think it's September 19th is the first.
Yes, we're asking to go to council on September 19th. Hasn't been formally approved by council yet, but that's when we're seeking to go.
That's what we're working towards. And then it could be that it's a work session and followed by a subsequent decision. It's up to council to decide if they want to select that preferred alternative on the 19th or not.
So,
Sorry.
yeah, no, it's good. At that, yeah, we will start going towards questions and comments. So in here,
Okay, someone else has to go first.
we have some questions online as well, but I can say,
Is everybody signed in, by the way?
I didn't say it. I'll say it.
yeah, sure.
Put your hands down.
Oh, you did, oh, good, she's trying to be, okay.
And then we just ask you identify yourself for the recording and you speak up so that those online can hear.
Yeah, I have a question, Carl Kadish. The pedestrians that are going south on Pine Street, the side closer to the water, are there several options how they would get across the roadway to have the roundabout?
Yeah, so if you're on the west side of Pine Street heading southbound, then there would be a couple of different alternatives. You can, cross easternly across Pine Street to get to the eastern side of Pine to continue southerly, or you continue along to the northern portion and there's a crossing up again a little further west of Pine Street, which then can take you down and you can continue on the south side. Yeah, so
What is the distance between?
this is design details that we don't have determined yet. The size of the roundabout is based upon speeds and traffic volumes. There's
10 feet or 20 feet?
the size of that, it's going to be larger due to the truck trafficking that is anticipated to be using
Roundabouts
this.
typically have like 90-foot inscribed circle.
Yeah, what's shown there is 120, just for.
So 120 foot is on this one. Okay. But yeah, so it's gonna be that alternative intersection configuration would, yes, be a little bit larger and would require additional walking to get around.
So just to envision that.
Could you state your name for the record, please?
Oh, sure, it's Lindsay Foster Mason. So I can envision that, how big is that in comparison to the roundabout that's currently being constructed a little bit further south than Sheldon?
Yeah, it would be a similar size to that roundabout, to promote slower vehicle speeds, but still allow truck traffic to get through. Another good comparison point is the roundabout Waterbury at the intersection of Route 2 and 100 as you get off the interstate. That's the scale that we're looking at. That was designed to accommodate large trucks for Green Mountain coffee roasters that come through that intersection, but also be at a scale to be, encourage slow speeds and have a shared use path connection and pedestrian crosswalks as well.
Oh, Steve is,
Several questions.
Steve, can you just state your name for the record? please?
The meeting on the 19th, you're not deciding the issues of the intersection, you're deciding the basic.
Correct. At this point, just the 1B, 2, and 5, 5B are being discussed to be looked at, and then that would be what the determination would be. The intersection configuration itself is still to be determined, following further gathering of information.
This is meant to be sort of a, I know you can't do everything, but it's meant to be a complete street.
Correct.
With access points, driveways, whatever.
Correct.
Where would the railroad be accessed?
So in the up kind of, mark the cursor, there would be a larger opening at this level was being discussed as a larger access point in order to allow the rail yard to access both further western of the rail tracks as well as their current ballast pile and fuel location there. More
Is there a turning lane for that?
it would be, the turning lanes are identified here at the location of South Champlain, so they can turn into that access point there. And then further one up north. So right now there's 2 locations identified to enter and exit.
And is it possible, look at this long time ago, could the rail track located further to the west and allow you to not take so much of the intended?
We've had a lot of back and forth with the rail yard. And this is kind of where those conversations had gotten to, that the rail yard at this point had felt comfortable continuing those discussions with us. So further movements created larger impacts that were not all able to be accepted by the rail yard. And so this is where we've gotten to, but discussions are still underway, and that's not saying this is what the final alignment is going to be. But at this point, this is the information that we've gathered, and this is what we have been to a point that we feel comfortable we're able to continue to move forward and further develop.
So I guess I would just expand on that a bit and explain to you, to the group, that the consultant team has met with VRS a number of times, largely to understand each individual operation within the rail yard and the consequence of displacing certain elements of that to avoid any sort of impact to adjacent properties. And so from all those things that was in consideration, there's some things that could be moved without significant consequence. Other things are just impossible for them to continue to operate without having that addressed in some fashion, some form. One of the key things here, I think, that the VRS is willing to accommodate here is a change in geometry in this blue alignment that is not their preferred choice, but is something they're willing to consider given the consequence of impacts to adjacent properties. So they're trying to be good partners in that. One of the most critical things to their operation is the center line operations that load and unload long line of equipment. You've probably seen some of those activities with Vermont Guard deployments where they move long streams of trucks and equipment and tanks and all that good stuff. And so that is central to their business and really needs that long track segment in the center. They are working with us to find options to displace that so that they don't have continuing impacts in this roadway. Under this current design, they would at some period would have to propose to close out the street, and they don't want that. They don't want to be part of interfering with this street. So they are been good partners in this process, and we're appreciative of that. And I think we're just continuing that conversation to find creative solutions, not just creative solutions coming from the city, but VRS. So I know that people are concerned that VRS is just selfishly looking at things. That is not the case. They are working with us, and we are very pleased with the results of some of the considerations they're offering here.
Is there salt shed still there?
Currently, it is, yes.
It's active.
Yes. So there may be some of those operations that can be relocated without significant consequence. That we're working with them to kind of determine the best outcome for both VRS and the neighboring community.
I'm going to go to a couple of the online questions here, just real quick. So the first one we have, apologies if I do not pronounce someone's name appropriately. I'm doing my best. We have Susan Grasso has a question that is, if using the area near the barge canal for the project is not an option, are there any other redevelopment plans being considered there, or is it waiting for further remediation? As part of this project, we are looking at these areas. However, if it doesn't meet what we are looking for, we are not looking to redevelop it as part of this project. Now, whether the city or property owners have other intentions, that can't be spoken to here. But you know, there is possibility for those things to be redeveloped in the future. I would say the next one I have here is Kevin Tui. What changes, if any, are planned to be made to Battery Street north of Maple Street? Sorry, this thing shifted.
That's that CCRPC study of
Yeah.
Third Street.
So right now, yeah, they're getting the early phases of potential CCRPC collaborative study of Battery Street corridor. In that, it'd be anticipated to be evaluated to see what usage or potential redevelopment options there are for the roadway alignments, as you know, the current 4 lanes would be evaluated to see whether or not, you know, some sort of shifting or modification, bike facilities might be able to be installed. So that study would evaluate potential future development or changes to the Battery Street corridor. And then we go South Burlington Planning and Zoning says, of the Pine Street intersection options, which would encourage through traffic to use Battery Street rather than Pine at Maple, which one is the best? And to that, I'll speak to that.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Regardless of the intersection configuration, a significant portion of the traffic is anticipated to use the new roadway. We're anticipating a 50% reduction, approximately 50% reduction in traffic north of the intersection on Pine Street. That being said, there are slight nuances in terms of the anticipated volumes of traffic that each intersection would divert. We anticipate this signalized Y intersection to divert the most amount of traffic toward the new roadway, with the roundabout being in the middle, and then this intersection diverting the least out of the 3. But just keep in mind, it's the roadway that's driving that traffic diversion mostly, and it's not necessarily the intersection configuration. And it's the origins and destinations on either side of the roadway. You know, say the north end of Burlington, connecting to the southern portion of Burlington and beyond. So the differences in you know, the intersection configuration are not significant in relation to that traffic diversion. But you know, in comparison, there are some slight differences.
The next one, we have Bob Lighty says, I really like the Y connection to make it clear that car traffic goes on this new connection. The shared use path between Battery Street and South Champlain could be eliminated and replaced by biking on South Champlain to Main Street and a walking path up Maple to South Champlain. By eliminating the shared use path, there might be room for the road alone to avoid the building. Part of this is the purpose and need of the project is looking to try to create a multimodal roadway section. By eliminating features fully from any roadway section, we would not be necessarily meeting those purpose and needs, which would then go into the evaluation of the project. So appreciate the comment, but the desire is to maintain the ability for multimodal biking, walking, you know, and cars to use this corridor, both now and in the future. Yeah, and that still wouldn't be enough with the way in which the current alignments and the historic resources are located. It's likely the southern portion of that building would be required, would be impacted regardless. Is I'm going back to the room. Yes.
Mary Kay, a couple questions. About the South Champlain Street. If one were working somewhere in City Hall, or go to Main Street, coming in on the Parkway and they came in here, would they be tempted to get off first at the South Champlain exit rather than going up further up to Battery Street and then going down Main?
Yeah, I mean,
No, or you could go up and find again. I so it's within that area and I want to get as most traffic as I can on.
again, yes. So the trafficking that is looking to go to locations such as, that southern portion of downtown are going to take the most direct route. Those cars would still continue to use Pine Street to go that route. If vehicles are trying to go further east to UVM, it's likely they wouldn't be using this roadway section in the first place. They'd be more over Shelburne or taking Main Street down from the other side. So it really is the destination. And the way in which the traffic study is looking is that the traffic, a lot of traffic that would be using this corridor would be looking to go around downtown and progress up to the, further Battery or to the new north end. But again, traffic studies can show good data. What people do sometimes varies. So you can't always account for every car, but to the best of knowledge, those will be reducing traffic that goes in that direction.
Second question is the design of the Champlain Parkway. I've never really seen that design. How does it fit in aesthetically?
So the Champlain Parkway project has a 10-foot shared use path on the west side of Pine Street. The Pine Street corridor itself is maintained fairly similar to what it is currently, with a 5-foot sidewalk on the eastern side, 10-foot shared use path on the western side, and single lane traffic going each direction. Also with a bike lane in the roadway. And that is going to be coming up on Pine Street here, south of Kilburn, kind of into Pine Place, and would be tying into this design to continue that shared use path facility along the new roadway alignment.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Fleming. You touched on this a little bit before, Corey, but I'd like to learn more about the mission of a dedicated and protected bike lane on this road. I know there's the shared travel lane, but even for advanced bikers, sharing the road with vehicles is very dangerous and uncomfortable. So I'd like to know why in the plans there was no no option for a dedicated and protected bike lane.
Yeah, I can answer that. To have a dedicated and protected bicycle lane on the new roadway would actually require a wider roadway width to accommodate that. So it was a balance of trying to accommodate as many abilities as possible as we can with this new roadway. Even with a protected bicycle lane, less experienced bicyclists are still a little reluctant to bike on the road, even if it is protected. So to have a cross section like that with a bike lane, we would still need that roadway width to accommodate trucks, plus a protection for the bike lane, plus the bike lane width itself, which is going to be 4 or 5 feet. So it just becomes a very wide section.
So the 10-foot shared pedestrian path, that is set in stone. There's no.
That's a low stress facility that accommodates all user types within that class of mode of transportation. So someone who's an active cyclist can use the shared use path. Someone who's not comfortable riding in the roadway can make use of the shared use path. So the intent is that shared use path accommodates all users that are cyclists or pedestrians.
Okay, because I know sometimes these paths, pedestrians complain because bikes fly
There's
through.
sometimes of both.
Yeah.
So obviously there's a trade-off there.
And that was where we had looked at potentially narrowing the shared use path at one point due to just right-of-way limitations, but we felt it necessary to maintain that 10-foot through this entire corridor for that purpose. And that was definitely feedback that we received from meeting with stakeholders and other community members, so.
I'd like to move to answer some questions. Why we have a couple people with raised hands.
Olivia, can we answer just one more? Somebody has been waiting patiently here.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, my questions are more basic. I don't know if this was covered in the first 14 minutes that we missed because we were at the front door trying to figure out, is this the right night and why is the door locked? I'm more basic here. I applaud connectivity. I applaud infill. I applaud another terminus, sort of, for the Champlain Parkway Road to nowhere and helping that whole situation at Maple Street. These are all good things. I'm trying to figure out what motivates this road. Who is motivated by this road? And is this road, I assume it's developmental. Will there be housing? Will there be commerce? And a big concern, I live on Howard Street. I use Curtis Lumber all the time. I was very devoted to the transfer station there for the solid waste. And it's getting ridiculous in our livable city. We have to drive our stuff to the suburbs now to get rid of it. And my fear is, I hope there's housing planned for this space. I don't know who's behind, who's motivated, who's going to make all this happen. Now, maybe I haven't done my homework, but I had gone to a meeting about this before, I mean, pre-COVID, when this thing was just a little egg in someone's head. Curtis Lumber, from what I understand down there, they're going, there is no good alternative for us. How are you going to compensate? How are you going to make sure that these businesses can carry on close to home and set themselves up a nice business? They're so happy they're back in town after being in the burbs. What are we doing to make this a livable city besides getting cars and bikes and painted bike lanes? I mean, we don't need more brewers. We don't need more coffee shops. We don't need more bicycles painted on the pavement. What does this have that is going to help our livability, our vitality? Who stands to benefit from this? Someone's motivated to do this. I'm not really understanding the basic project. I want to know more about this.
Well, there's a lot of good information. I would say that we do have, we can't cover everything here tonight. I would recommend on our website, the railyardenterprise.com, there is the.
But just some basic.
So basically, no, we can use some basic stuff. Yeah, but I just want to use this as a point to say that there is the original Pell study, and that is posted online, as well as the supplemental Pell, which goes through, and there's also, I don't know if it's on our website or not, but the BT, Plan BTV for the South End.
On Howard Street, so very invested in this moment.
Oh, yes, and so those are a lot of things that kind of led to the development of this. Now, this corridor would put more roadway frontage. It would be looking to potentially, while it does impact some current operations, we would look to try to do more roadway frontage and options for further development in the future. There has been some communication about potentially developing new housing in the area. So those are not part of this project directly, but
Right
those are
now,
things that
it's
could
just
come
a
from.
road.
At this point,
We're
it is,
disrupting all these businesses for a road.
It's to mitigate traffic.
Yeah, well, I know that. I mean,
Main Street.
I know, but I mean, I think
it around.
the more traffic is distributed, the better. But, you know, this Champlain Parkway means that Pine Street will be truncated on Queen City Park Road for bikes, pedestrians, and cars, which makes, puts traffic on other roads. I mean, traffic finds its way, and the more ways there are to get places is good. That's why this is good. But I'm just wanting to have something besides a road that is between the people and the lake. I hope there's infill. I hope stuff happens.
this would potentially put,
No, they don't pay for that.
That's
It's private
further development.
enterprise somewhere has to make this thing happen.
and you're also looking at the current infrastructure in the area, predominantly on the western side is a rail yard, which limits any sort of development on that western side. the eastern side is being impacted. It is also creating potentially new frontage that would hopefully further. The desire would be to promote new options and new opportunities. But those are communications and discussions that are being held with those stakeholders.
That's still all
And-
in the air. There's really
Correct.
nothing solid going, no solid development plan around this road.
Until there's a road, you can't have.
That's part of the problem is this project, at least if we're advancing this project and we're gelling the project to stage of development and design, then all those private property owners won't be in limbo as they have been in the past. And they'll come to some conclusions about how they can potentially redevelop their site. So we believe that is a residual effect of this is we're going to improve the backside access to their building. We're going to
So Curtis Lumber, these
Provide
are
clarity.
things that will happen for them.
These have been
provide clarity
discussions.
about what they can and can't do on their site as opposed to this questionable future, which is without this project kind of moving ahead, everybody's stuck in this kind of this cycle of what's going to happen.
Since 2012.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think the property owners just want relief from that. They just want clarity about what the next steps are.
I just know going down to Curtis, they're not very excited about this.
Well, we've talked to them and they are very supportive of the project. They've been very cooperative with us in our conversation with them. So it's been good.
Different Conversation with them.
well, it probably depends on who you talk to.
Yeah,
Right?
I bet.
There's people who aren't in the know, who may have concerns and aren't really warm and fuzzy about it, but there's.
I just want to make sure that these businesses are not displaced by a road.
Well, we are very concerned about that as well, and we've been deep dive conversations with everybody in this area that is impacted. And Curtis is one of those key partners in those conversations.
Good, well, if they're in, I'm in. I just
Yep.
don't want more stuff to disappear.
I'm gonna to shifts. We need to address a couple people that have their hands raised online, and then we'll come back into the room. Olivia.
So I'm gonna go first to Andy Simon. Andy, I've allowed you to talk. You'll have to unmute yourself.
I think I'm unmuted.
Yep.
Okay. Hi, Andy Simon. I live on Locust Street, and I, in answer to the other commenter, I think it's really important to note that this should have a huge impact on the King and Maple Street neighborhood in terms of alleviating traffic through that neighborhood. And that, I think, is one of the main motivations. We talked about economic development and other things, but at least one of the big drivers from my point of view is alleviating stress on alleviating the impact that's been happening and will happen on Pine Street. With the Champlain Parkway, they're anticipating a 39% increase in traffic through that neighborhood. And this, at least eventually, should take some of that traffic out. I think that of the alternative intersection designs that you have promoted or suggested, it seems fairly obvious to me that a roundabout is the best choice. I mean, just in terms of traffic flow, in terms of bike and pedestrian traffic, safety, basic safety, roundabouts are the best. And they do take some getting used to, I think, but because we're not a very roundabout centric, if you will, culture at this point. But I think that roundabout, just even looking at the design, stopping traffic at a stoplight, especially now these days when stoplights are not as respected, red lights are not as respected as they had been, as you may have noticed on the streets. I think a roundabout would be a lot safer, a lot better traffic flow, and better for everyone. I also do have a question. One is mostly about public transit. You've spoken of this as a multimodal system, and the modes that you've talked about so far are cars and bikes and pedestrians. What about public transit? How is this going to impact public transit, and how is it going to get people, in what way will it get people out of cars and onto a much improved public transit system?
Yeah, I can address that question. We did connect with Green Mountain Transit to talk about this project and the alternatives and this concept alignment. And Well, they don't have any plans right now for routing using this new roadway. What they did talk to us about was the potential benefit that this new roadway provides. They have certain routes that they call, I believe they're called special routes. And they're routes that they contract with the school district to transport children that live in King and Maple Street neighborhoods. And by virtue of this new roadway and the reduction of traffic that would result in those neighborhoods with this new roadway, Green Mountain Transit's opinion was it would only help make those stops and getting on and off the buses more comfortable. So that's the extent of the conversation we've had with them so far. Jonathan Slason's on the line as well. Jonathan's part of that conversation with Green Mountain Transit. Jonathan, anything else to add? Does that accurately sum up our conversation with them?
Yeah, I also forget offhand the neighborhood specials or something. I think the two things that are valuable is that they would suggest bifurcating future routes, and that the Pine Street routes that currently exist in that neighborhood could be increased in frequency because of the number of school-aged children that have maybe they would increase their use of that public transit if the overall volume of traffic were to be reduced. The other side of the benefit of the new road that was discussed by Green Mountain Transit was that it would provide a faster route to the transit center via Battery Street. And so it would be less cumbersome for them to route through the current neighborhood.
Olivia, do you want to?
Yep, sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much, Andy, for your comments. I'll move to our second person on the phone, Mary Twitchell. We'll allow you to speak, and if you unmute yourself, you should be able to speak.
Hello, I think I just unmuted. This is Diane Gayer, actually. On Mary's computer.
Okay.
And I appreciate what Andy was saying about the roundabout. I live near the roundabout on Shelburne Road, and seeing what that's becoming, I would love to see that finished before I'm totally convinced. Much as I appreciate and agree with roundabouts, I'm reserving judgment until this one's finished. But to my question, I was trying to strategize if this shared use path continued not all the way to Battery Street, but then jogged over to South Champlain Street, if that might not both allow what your intentions are, as well as help the properties in that block. Because I don't really see that it takes any longer to go on South Champlain Street to get where you're going than to stay on this new diagonal.
Yeah.
The gist of it is really how much that shared use path really could be contiguous in other ways. And although I realize that people, all the bicyclists all want their own lane, just like car people do. There are a lot of people that walk, and we can't or take the bus, but the bus is always empty these days. We need to think a little bit more holistically about where we're taking up the real estate of land. Thank you.
Yeah, part of that would be with the multimodal usage, you're providing additional pedestrian, foot traffic, bike traffic in front of these parcels, which could potentially be used for further redevelopment of that front space. You're getting more traffic through there. You're not just getting cars whizzing by, you're getting people coming through that, if these properties are looking to redevelop or change which side of the building as a frontage, they can attract more business than just having cars whizzing by. That is a big portion of why this also, as far as a potential future development portion, is an important feature to be had in this roadway design.
But to explore her question, and I want to confirm with the lady on the call, are you suggesting that the preferred route should not continue beyond North South Champlain, that not to continue to Battery Street? Or just pedestrian portion?
Just the pedestrian portion. I don't know if I'm
Okay.
still unmuted.
All right, I was gonna say that it's incredible, you know, purpose and need. Clearly, there needs to be a connection between Pine Street and Battery Street, so that's really not in
No,
play. So you weren't raising that question, so thank you for clarifying.
Yes.
Hi, Chris Dunkel. Are there plans for the historic Railyard roundabout?
At this point, no. The plans would be to not impact that historic.
Roundhouse.
Yeah.
The roundhouse thing.
To continue to cover it with £1 million of gravel.
Okay, I do. Seems like it's doing a lot of public good in that way. I'm just curious why that's, it seems like it has an outsized displacement on the whole design, as does the gravel pile, two things I don't really see as giving to the public. But that's, I guess, more of a comment than a question.
I didn't know if you wanted to respond or not. So,
Oh, okay, sure, please.
well, I was gonna say, as part of the process, the historic resources, that is considered a 4F resource. And as it being considered such, it is required to be reviewed and treated similar to historic buildings and other things that are 4F resources. That is not a, that is.
Well, there's two purposes to this. Well, number one is you have an active Railyard that's making use of that space that consequently is above ground to that facility. That facility is being protected by its cover.
I see.
So it's going to be retained there, allowed to be there for as long as historic preservation people believe that it's an important resource to be protected. So we support that. We believe that. We a part of our consideration, as I said earlier, was looking at and RSG's done this work, is vibration and impact to that resource based on the roadway itself. So we believe that the roadway is not going to have a significant any consequence to that resource. Therefore, this alternative works, at least from that perspective.
And then as far as the business that the Railyard's conducting above the roundhouse.
Yep.
That's nothing that they can relocate or.
Well, that's part of what I explained earlier, is there's things that they can potentially relocate to other locations. And there are things that need to remain for them to be able to function.
Okay.
And so it's a give and take in terms of individual operations. And Greg has this funny math, all from CHA's work, all the different operations within that Railyard. There's a bunch of little bubbles all over the Railyard that identify those things. So we're clearly, we understand what's going on there in terms of their activity. And we're working with them to kind of find a solution that works for them, but also works for. And yeah, maybe one of the higher priority business opportunities that they have.
Yeah. I'm gonna get to a couple of these questions and then come back to the room. We have, let's see, Susan Grasso says, what is the expected desired land use development pattern along this new road? That, is kind of up to the property owners at this point as to how that would be developed. There is a plan TV that has some stated ideas as to what could be used to be developed. However, really the owners of those parcels are the ones who kind of have that determination as to what potentially would be development or redevelopment of those parcels.
I mean, that's predicated on zoning. And what development opportunities people want to pursue on their property. And we want to try to find ways to encourage that and support that and not have this project come to be in the way of that. But it's a very difficult challenge for everybody involved. It's the bottom line.
And then the next one, there's multiple here. I will just get to the first two real quick from Robert Fitzgerald. It says, has a traffic pattern analysis been done for each of the intersection options?
Yes, it has. Yeah.
So yes, it has. And then further development though, as we proceed along the design, correct?
Yeah, and those details will be included in the environmental assessment document that's submitted for review and approval. But a detailed traffic analysis has been completed for each of the intersection options. And each of those intersection options adequately serves the traffic that would be flowing through those intersections.
The second one we have here is our streetscape improvements planned on the east side to include more trees and greenery. And we said, yes, within that, we are looking at options, but again, that's a detail that would be further reviewed as the roadway configuration alignments and dimensions are finalized or further developed. So to what extent the greenery or plantings can be done will depend and will be determined at a later date. But it's anticipated that there will be some greenery or some artwork or something along this corridor to make it more inviting, inclusive, and enjoyable for all users. I will go to this next one. Bob Lighty says, I understand that you don't want to build a road through the barge canal due to the soil pollution. Could we build a bike path connecting the Champlain Parkway to this project and go out South Champlain Street? I apologize, I am not following the connection. We are connecting the shared use path that is going to be on the Champlain Parkway project. And it would connect up along the eastern side of this new roadway alignment, which would go by South Champlain Street. So I believe that would be included as part of this. The next one is from Mark Ferguson. Is there any discussion about connecting the northern, sorry, this jumped. Is there any discussion about connecting the northern end of the multi-use trail to the waterfront bike trail? I would imagine a lot of bike traffic would want to connect. Yes, that is something, that intersection with Battery Street is being looked at. You know, there is the Battery Street, the study that is anticipated to be coming up soon on Battery Street. And as part of that, how Battery Street corridor is potentially being reviewed. We understand that, yes, we want people to be able to connect to the waterfront and to continue to use Burlington's other bike features. At this point, within this particular project, any changes along Maple are not being considered, but further development as for Battery Street review is done. We anticipate there would be some in the future.
So I would just expand on that, saying that Railyard Enterprise project, all these federal state funded projects, there are project limits. And those limits are well defined and kind of are a break point to how far this project can address other outstanding issues. So that's where other projects have to come in to interface with the limits of this project to kind of make those connections. But this brings us that much closer to making those connections, establishing those connections through other projects. So understand that there are limitations to what we can and can't do with the project itself. But other projects can make those connections.
We had a couple other here.
Yep, I had two questions. Jeremy Fleming again. One was kind of pertaining to one of the questions that we just went over, but are there plans or have there been conversations about what's going to be on the shared pedestrian path in terms of, public gardens or benches, sculptures, other art? And if you haven't had those conversations, who will be having those conversations?
Yeah, so understanding the project limits and the exact configuration is still being determined. And once we have a selected alternative and we move into the next phase with a detailed design and start going through that, those kind of conversations will start coming up as we see what space is available, what space is being used for potential water storage or, where the utilities are going to be relocated. We have to determine those sort of physical infrastructure limitations, and then what the space is available and what space we can make for these other additional features. We do anticipate, depending on the intersection configurations, that there will be some green spaces opened up as part of this project, regardless of which one of the intersection options is selected. So we do anticipate there will be locations that we can do something that is going to be inviting, and also would be, we would take more feedback from individuals and from public as to what sort of features people would like to see in that later phase.
So when we reach design, that's all gonna be part of that conversation. The intersection selection, the details of the cross section in terms of amenities that potentially would be there, the very finite specifics to, as Corey said, utilities, so on and so forth, and how it all kind of packaged with it. So that's at a later stage of the conversation.
Thank you. One other question was just about parking on these roads. Do you plan to include an extra lane for parking? Or will it just be 2 lanes and a turning lane?
This phase right now, it is predominantly the roadway for travel. There is some parallel parking being proposed at this juncture, but again, these are preliminary. We're looking at this, we'll evaluate it further as far as limits, access, and the space available as properties still need to be maintained. We've talked with stakeholders about parking as it is currently, as parking might be with the roadway, and trying to determine the best usage of space, as well as access to businesses to promote lower commutes and transport goods to these businesses. So this is all still being determined and discussed. As this roadway alignment currently shows on this particular one, we do have parallel parking shown at just south of Maple at the intersection of Battery, as well as parallel parking shown along South Champlain for that section of roadway as well.
Just very limited scope of parking as it's planned right now, and that's largely to accommodate the existing uses of stakeholders. We don't want to widen the cross section to accommodate parking unless there's a strong desire from the public to do that. That significantly changes the impact of those properties. So we're trying to get a very minimalist approach to this that provides accommodation of all modes, but doesn't get into too deep into the widening the cross section of the park.
And there's no parking there now.
There's no parking there. Sorry.
One in the back. Sorry, one in the back and then over, yeah.
Here,
Back first, yeah.
just one clarification on the impetus for this project. I say this because I was there when we did it. The actual impetus for the project was to correct what the city clearly saw as problems with the current federally mandated design of the Southern Connector project. The idea the connector would go up Pine Street to King, Maple, King, Main Street. It's not something the city wanted them to do. If it's mandated, this project is, I think it would deal with the problem, is to correct that problem. It may have other benefits. But that is why you're looking at this today, because 12 years ago, the city recognized it and is desperate to find a way to deal with that. This looks very much like the earlier Southern Connector routes that we actually had approved back in the 90s. It is. So that's why it's here, that the city knows it's a problem. This is an attempt, and if it works, we'll solve it. That's why it's.
I'd love to have less traffic.
That's why this is here.
Okay, and I'm all very much for that. It just seems like it's misnamed enterprise. I don't understand.
Hold on.
That's why I was looking for the land. use.
The only way they can look at it was to come up with a project, wasn't called the Southern Connector, somehow wasn't associated with it, it's supposed to have its own use for being built. It really doesn't.
Can
That's
we say
the
the
way.
kind of interplay conversation?
I'm sorry, I just keep looking for the enterprise in this. I guess that's where I was.
It's the name.
Okay.
So your comments were heard, Steve. There's ongoing litigation. I don't think we're going to address that in tonight's meeting.
I'm just pointing out what happened. I'm not saying
Right,
it's.
that's fine, but I don't think it's appropriate for us to respond in any way to that.
Yeah, I'm not asking.
Okay, so I live on Upper Howard Street and I feel very fortunate to live there because I can walk downtown. I can walk all the way down to the waterfront on the bike path. I do a lot of walking in this town. And I actually very rarely drive within Burlington city limits. And I wonder about the fact that this roadway is excuse me, my voice is really hoarse today. But I wonder about the fact that this is a multimodal road. And I know that for myself, I feel that walking in Burlington is not a safe thing to do. And as a pedestrian, I feel so often ignored at intersections. And I just am wondering if how important it really is to have a multimodal, somewhat, I mean, I know you said it was going to be a 25-mile-per-hour limit, but this is a roadway that seems to, I don't know, to promote at least a little bit speedier traffic. People will be wanting to, move into this area more quickly. And I just, in relation to what you were saying earlier about bicyclists not feeling safe, sharing the roadway with cars, and I would think especially during the winter months when the roadways aren't particularly safe for bicyclists anyway, just because of slipperiness and ice and all sorts of other issues, potholes that could be hidden. And I'm just wondering if, in terms of the space allocation for the roadway, if what is currently you're envisioning as being used for both experienced bicyclists and for cars, if that were just used for cars, and the shared space which you currently are envisioning for both pedestrians and bicyclists could just be used for bicyclists. Because I know for myself as a big walker in this town, I try to avoid car-heavy roads. I really prefer the quieter neighborhood streets to walk downtown, however it is, wherever it is downtown that I'm going. And so I don't think I'm going to be walking on this, because to me, it's unpleasant to be next to a car, no matter how fast it's moving. And again, I envision the speed just because I see how much faster people are driving now post-COVID. I kind of envision this as being at least a little bit more of a speedway than you're thinking of.
So I think that one of the things that you want to focus on is the cross section, and maybe we can pull up a drawing of the cross section, but there is a 5-foot space, 5'6" buffer space between the edge of the roadway and the shared use path. The shared use path is pretty dimensionally takes quite a bit of space to accommodate that pedestrian bike. So I think there's an opportunity here for that buffer to build a level of comfort that you need to walk within that community, in that neighborhood. So
I would want to walk on the 2-foot buffer side.
yeah, okay, yeah, I understand. But, this you still don't have solutions in terms of whether it's gonna be art, trees, or whatever that creates that 5'6" buffer.
Right, and I realize that you're trying to make it, I mean, from what you said earlier, that you are trying to make it a pleasant walkway, I mean, with artwork benches, whatever. But yeah, I don't know.
It's not like you've got a shared use path that's adjacent to the curb. You've got cars blowing by you. You've got a 5'6" buffer, which is substantial.
Yeah, it's just that it seems like it's going to be a fairly heavy traffic road, and that would be something that I would think most walkers would want to avoid, especially given the fact that drivers really don't pay attention to us as pedestrians.
Yeah, it's a behavioral issue that we try to deal with through design, but we don't have full control of how people conduct themselves, unfortunately. That's the challenge we have as engineers. We wish we would get the hearts and minds of people to slow down and drive accordingly, but it doesn't always happen that way.
Well, a former police chief of this city almost ran me over coming out of his driveway. So, even those of us who, those people who are,
Yep.
We all make
Yeah, people make
mistakes.
mistakes, that's right.
I'm gonna get to a couple here online real quick, and then we'll come back. We have Jonathan from the local motion. It seems like the speeds will be below 25 miles. Speeds will be below 25 miles per hour with 13-foot lanes, and 13-foot lanes are also above the maximum set in the city's transportation plan. What is the reasoning for that width? Greg, we'll talk about that with regards to trucks.
Yeah, sure. It's primarily driven by the truck traffic that's going to use the roadway and the curvature of the roadway alignment. We need to safely accommodate the trucks through here. The Railyard is not going away. It's going to be there, and they're going to continue their operations through there. So we really need to strike that balance of being able to accommodate that motor vehicle traffic, yet fit the roadway in and try to minimize impact. So we're literally trying to thread a needle here with all the different users and the impacts. And so that's really what's driving the design of this curb to curb width of the roadway.
The next one I have here is from Peter Duval. How would the various alternatives affect motor vehicle travel time through the project area?
Yeah, Jonathan, I am going to direct that question to you. I think you've got a good answer for that one. That's been analyzed in terms of that travel time. So Jonathan, you still online?
Yep, Greg. Yeah, so in the alternative, in the build condition, the southbound direction is proposed or forecast to improve only modestly in the build options, but the northbound direction is anticipated to improve dramatically. And that's primarily because of that diversion of traffic out of the Maple, Pine, King Street neighborhood. And what we looked at were travel times between a southern location on Pine Street, as northbound direction would like to go either to Main and Battery or to Main and Pine. And so depending on where they were destined, we looked at the travel times between those 2 points, both from a southbound and northbound. So I think with confidence, we can say that the travel diversion really substantially improves the northbound travel speeds through the study area.
And then, yeah, we'll go back to the room.
Yeah, I like the comment that you had about walking next to roads and how it can be uncomfortable sometimes. And I was wondering if there's a possibility of planting trees on both sides of the buffer zone. It's been proven from what I've read that drivers in close proximity to trees drive slower, and it's quite nice for pedestrians who walk alongside the trees in order to have a kind of blockage between the road and pedestrian path.
Yeah, again, those are details that would be further investigated in the next phase, but we are looking at that because, yeah, as you said, there's objects there on the edge of the road that it does impact traffic.
So one of the things that's important to design is tree volumes. In order to have a tree successfully thrive in that space, you have to have a certain volume of space for the root ball. And so that's sometimes a very challenging thing when you have a narrower green belt, but in this case, we have a 5'6" green belt. So it has a stronger potential for accommodating a tree and have a full life growth within that tree. But that's early. We don't know how that really fits because we have to accommodate utilities within this corridor, or where do those utilities go? A lot of times that utilities end up in the green belt space. And so we're going to try to avoid that to accommodate trees, because trees are one of those high priorities. That's a design.
And that actually goes into one of the comments we have here from Jonathan from Local Motion. Will the green belt be sufficient to support trees? To Norm's point.
It's going to be looked at.
Next question I have here is from Bob. It says, the independent block independent block owner on board with this concept. And we said we've been in conversation with them, obviously being significantly impacted. To be blunt, it's not ideal, but we're going to work with them and talk with them, and we've been already. They're have been understanding, and we've continued to talk with the stakeholders in that area, and we will continue to talk with them as we proceed through further in the concept and the design phase. So the next question is from Susan Grasso. Asking, is there a report that presents the analysis of these three alternatives, including the traffic analysis and so on? That is going to be a document that is submitted to Federal Highway here in hopefully late November. So that document will be published once it's submitted, and it will be available through the Railyard Enterprise Project website.
So in immediate near term, no.
So right now there is not, but it will be available once the document is finalized and submitted. That's here from Peter Duvall. Says, please describe the no build alternative. How much less would it cost? What are the alternative uses of the funds? And did you consider making this a one-way facility for motor vehicles? So let's break this down. Yes, the no build alternative has been considered and has also been weighed against these alternatives with the purpose and need. That being said, is that there's impacts of whether you build it or whether you don't build it with how traffic is anticipated to function now as well as in the future through the design analysis. That being said, at this point, the project team is looking to still consider, but still have conversations with stakeholders and those impacted parties. But we feel the purpose and need can be met while managing the impacts. That's, again, the level of detail will be further evaluated as we move on in the process once a preferred alternative is selected. But at this juncture, we feel that the 1B alternative would be the preferred alternative. You asked how much would this cost? At this point, the project has a $20 million price tag associated with what is available for fundings through our I apologize,
Cooperative agreement.
Thank you. With the cooperative agreement that we currently have with the state. That, to be blunt, is anticipated to likely not cover the full cost of what it's going to take to design and build this project with mitigation or the property rights acquisitions and the design and contaminated soils and construction, and also the way the economy is right now. It is anticipated that more than $20 million is going to be required to complete this project. Now, at this juncture, we are only working on the design and for the proceeding further. And as we end up having a conceptual design and have a better understanding of what those costs are going to be, then further communication, further discussions and requests can be made for additional funding or to see if that funding could be increased. But at this juncture, the $20 million is what we were put as a cap on the project.
So just so everyone understands and knows, in these cooperative agreements, there are partners in this process: Federal Highway Administration, State, V-Trans, and the city. And the general split for this cooperative agreement is 80% Federal Highway contribution, 10% state contribution, and generally the city's 10% local match. So the numbers are not precisely 10 and 10, but within that ballpark, that's generally how the cooperative agreement works. So.
Further clarify, if the price tag goes over 20 million, which it will, if we build this, those additional resources are either going to be provided by Burlington voters, or there will be an option to go to the federal government and to the state government and say, can we have more money? This is actually a 45 million project. Because we're going to build this roundabout, and because we're going to do this, and because every grain of sand that comes out of this ground is going to be contaminated and have to be taken away. There are a lot of unforeseen costs that are probably going to show up. They're not building a road on top of an existing road bed, so they don't know It's just a different ball of wax than let's redo this stretch of road that already exists. I'm nervous about that too. But that's where it stands right now. Is that fair, Norm?
Yeah, except that I wouldn't place any dollar value on what that potential upset limit would be, but understand that if it exceeds this $20 million, which way our early impression is it's going to probably exceed the 20 million, then we would have to have a conversation with our partners to see if they can continue to contribute the same way, or is it really on the city? And then the city has to make choices about what we can and can't advance. But
right,
trying to stay positive and get to resolution for all host of reasons why this is important to the city. Or many of those important reasons through this conversation.
Yeah, I threw out a random figure.
Yeah, understood. But I just want to make sure that people understand that.
Yeah, the last part of that question was, did you consider making this a one-way facility for motor vehicles? Again, that goes back to that, purpose and need of the project and what are we building? So generally, no, this was not being looked at as being a one-way facility for vehicles only.
Corey, we do have a question. Somebody has their hand raised.
Yep, I was gonna say, if you want to get that next one, that'd be great.
Yep. Dan Castrogano. I'm sorry if I completely murdered that pronunciation. Go ahead and speak.
That was perfect. Thanks. Yeah. And actually, could you go back to the map, please? Okay, awesome. Thanks. Or one of the maps. Thanks. Thanks for taking public comment. I just have a few comments here. As I kind of wrap my head around this project, just want to ground everybody in the fact that with the climate crisis, we have to get as many cars off the road as possible. Transportation is the #1 sector of emissions. It's the #1 sector of emissions in Vermont, and personal vehicles is the biggest chunk of that sector. So whatever decisions are made should prioritize walking, biking, and public transit. The other thing that, as I'm looking at these maps, is building new surface parking. If you just look at like the southern, or I guess the eastern and northern parts of this map, the bottom and the right side, of how much of the largest city in Burlington, how much of the land is spent with surface parking. And we know that that incentivizes car use. It makes the urban heat island effect worse. It makes our water quality in Lake Champlain worse, right? There's more impermeable surfaces. And so to just do other stuff with surface parking and not to use public money on public land to build surface parking in the middle of the biggest city in Burlington. And those are my two main comments. So thanks again for listening.
Appreciate it. The next question we have on here, the question answer from Peter Duvall, using current and actual times navigational tools such as Google Maps, usually identifying Pine Street as the preferred route between points south of Burlington, say the Shelter Museum, and points north, Sunset Drive in. With decreased travel times under the build alternatives, what is the anticipated increase in traffic through the project area? I think we kind of addressed this earlier previously. Greg, you're saying with the
that's just a function of origin and destinations. I don't think that changes people's routes. Maybe this is a shorter route. They just take this versus say the Pine Street corridor, but I don't know how much of a consequence it changes people's long distance routes.
I want to say,
Right.
Jonathan, do you have anything else to add to that?
Just simply saying that after the amount of traffic that's anticipated to use the new Railyard roadway would give us a lot of flexibility for how we can reframe and look at the proposed intersections at Pine and Maple and Pine and King And so I think we can always prioritize this new Railyard route as being the preferred choice.
And then we've requested from Bob to see the third version of the design on the screen, so that'd be the sheet. All right, and then asking, did we discuss the timeline? Yes, we did discuss the timeline for the project. We have that on a previous slide. Just real briefly, at this juncture, we are looking to go to council for a approval for the anticipated preferred alternative that then would be with finalized documentation submitted in the EA for the preferred alternative project. We would then proceed with the design, and then based on the South Construction Coordination Plan, we'd be looking for desire to have this designed and completed with a design completion end of 2024, 2025, beginning of, and look to start construction in 2025. That would be sort of the best case scenario if everything gets approved and continues to move forward. Then you also asked, how does the city's portion of the budget compare with the mayor's opinion that if the school bond passes, that we will not bond for additional projects before 2030? I'm not exactly familiar with the most recent.
So obviously there's a challenge with the future bonding capacity of the city as it relates to projects. This is one of those projects that is perceived as an ongoing financial liability from a local net standpoint. And much of what was needed for this project, but I don't think necessarily all of it was captured within the 23 bond. So this, along with many other priorities, the mayor has to make decisions about where that investment is. But when you have a project that's advancing, there's a continuing need and responsibility to fund that project. So the other choices, likely other choices have to be made before these ongoing liabilities.
That is what we have
But we
for
don't know yet.
questions online. I don't know if there's anything else here in the room. Anyone else have any questions or comments? No? All right. Well, I just want to say appreciate everyone's time. You know, we were really glad with the turnout. Oh, no, now we have another hand up. Yep.
Yep, Peter, you are unmuted if you'd like to speak.
Yes, Peter Duval. What would it take is a question that is sometimes used to expand thinking about big problems. So I want to ask that question. What would it take in terms of cost or traffic effects, local or global ecological imperatives, or any other concerns that you can think of? What would it take for any engineer associated with this project to determine that no build would be the preferred alternative?
Well, that's a societal subjective opinion that we may not all share, and ultimately council and the mayor decide whether the alternatives move ahead and the consequence of what's important, what the value judgment is on that. So, you know, that as was noted, there is significant concerns about EJ issues related to the King Street, Maple Street neighborhood. There is significant issues with making decisions about this connection that's been discussed for many, many years. It's had consequence to the property owners. So there's a lot of things that come into play. There's existing problems with stormwater. There is the need for multimodal access from the rail yard to the street network. There is so many things to consider when considering these types of projects and whether they should advance or not. And I personally think that there's merit in this project going ahead with the alternative that we propose. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here tonight. But we're not ultimately the deciders. It's the council, it's the public. And we're here to listen. We're here to understand to serve your best interests, and while still being good partners with the Federal Highway Administration and the state of Vermont. So you ask a very loaded question that if you asked any one of us at the panel, you probably have somewhat different perspectives, but probably pretty much the same thing.
It's not a loaded question. You have already, well, let me ask this question. Who determined that alternative 1B was preferred?
I think it's collectively the team here sitting in front of you tonight is we're recommending as staff, but ultimately the council will decide what alternatives they want to pursue. Based on the comments they received from you as members of the public and what we're saying as staff and the information that we're gathering to provide them.
So it doesn't seem like it too difficult question to answer. To just to imagine what would cause the collective decision making to move toward the no build option.
If the purpose and need is not being met and the price for the project, I don't mean that financially, I mean that based on impacts to community members, stakeholders. If those things don't balance, if it's not looking like when you aggregate it all together and you look at the whole picture, that what you're proposing is going to be a detriment, then we would not be pursuing that alternative and we would look at a no build at that point. If none of these alternatives look to ultimately provide any greater good to the community.
Yeah, it's a thing. It's a balance sheet of benefits and costs. And what you value in terms of benefit is subjective. I don't know if there's other.
Just one other thing to note, is we learned the hard way, actually, federal government's gonna make that decision. We may have recommendations, but the federal government's gonna write their record decision.
Right, but
They
council-
choose the
yes,
alternative.
that's true.
The reason we have the alternative connector now is because they chose, not because we.
That's true. But council is guiding, at least they play a significant role in that decision making.
They can try.
Okay. Well, I will say appreciate again everyone who came and visited online, listen to this as well as everyone here in person. Again, please feel free to reach out to myself. I'm happy to get calls and converse further or provide additional information as necessary. As we are continuing to receive feedback and we're recording those and definitely taking that into consideration. So
Thank you all for being.
Thank you for coming.
thank you.